Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this workshop. It's title of the workshop, if you probably all know that, but is Language Teaching, K to 5, Teaching Latin and a Modern Foreign Language Classically in K to 5. And we have an amazing, wonderful person, a highly qualified presenter for this workshop. Dr. Laura Eidt is Affiliate Assistant Professor of Modern Languages and Director of the Humanities Program at the University of Dallas. Woohoo! I have 5 sons who have graduated from the University of Dallas. And of course, Mary Claire, who's taught for me for 5 years. Okay, so let's see. University of Dallas, and she teaches Spanish, German, comparative literature, humanities, and classical education courses. I have 2 sons who took courses from Dr. Eidt in German and comparative literature. And you've studied many languages, so English, Spanish, French, Italian, Latin, in addition to her native German. And German is a subject that she, as I said, that she taught to my sons, Anthony and Noah. So we're very grateful. The Kirsting family is very grateful to the Eidt family for the impact you had on us. So it's my privilege and delight to introduce to you Dr. Laura Eidt.
Thank you very much. So are you all pretty exhausted? Like on a scale from 0 to 10, where's your exhaustion level? 7, 8?
Fired up for this session.
Okay, well, thank you for being here so late in the afternoon and still having the energy to go through this. So let's just get started right away. And if you were in my session yesterday, I don't quite remember how many of you were here yesterday. So this is the general Trivium approach that I gave in the session yesterday. And so basically, I would like to show you how we can apply the Trivium even to the very youngest child. Because again, so I'm really not going to have time to go through all the whole Trivium explanation again, but we're seeing the Trivium as basically parts of a lesson, elements of a lesson, not stages of development. So children, even the youngest children, of course for the youngest ages, the arts of grammar and dialectic are going to play a larger role than rhetoric or even pre-rhetoric for the very young ages. But starting even like in 2nd and 3rd grade, rhetoric can already be integrated in some way. And in very general terms, I would like you to think of the art of grammar as being mostly about input. We talked in the session yesterday, we talked about the idea of input as the foundation for language acquisition, and also as basically, really as the basis of the art of grammar. Grammar not understood as a discipline, but as an art. And then the art of dialectic as being about input and guided output, where students are learning to produce the language. And then the art of rhetoric as being the beginning of creative and expressive student output. And so here, this overview is, it gives you some ideas of what that might look like for the really little ones, K to 3rd grade. And once again, for them, for kindergarten through at least kindergarten and 1st grade, mostly the arts of grammar dialectic will be in focus, but then some copywork and reader theater can happen already in those grade levels. And then once we move over to 4th and 5th grade, we can add in some more elements, like for example, meaningful grammar exercises, so we can draw students' attention more explicitly to the nature of language itself. But I would like you to always keep in mind that at the very youngest ages, our job really is mostly to help students be at home in language, to help students form a mental representation of the language. That is the underlying, the basic idea and the underlying framework. And then we can build from that toward greater understanding of the language itself. But we're starting with just immersing them in the language itself. So there is, of course, here a lot more than what I can do in 30 minutes. What I would like to do is give you an idea of how to, basically these 6 elements we're going to go through. And I will draw on a curriculum that I'm writing for Latin. But I wanted to emphasize that this is really not just for Latin. You can do this if you're teaching Spanish or if you're teaching French. So these are really just ideas to help you know what to do with the little ones in a language class. So this is not Latin specific, but we're going to just use those elements as an idea. And once again, you wouldn't do all of this in one lesson, obviously. This is just to give you an idea of, basically, we want to spread an abundant feast for our students so that they can all assimilate as much as possible. But we're not going to do exactly the same and 6 things in one lesson. So with that, let's get started right away. And I kind of need to be, we don't have any like pointer thing, right? So I might just need to jump up and down here. Okay, because I do want to be, does that work? Okay, so Felis, show me Felis, everyone, please. Felis, I need everyone to show me. I apologize, I'm going to be treating you like 6-year-olds. And I think at this late hour, you probably don't mind, right?
We're all flattered.
So, Felis, and ecke boss. Show me a good boss. Esne boss? Minime. Esne boss? Ita. Esne Felis an boss. Est Felis. Ita est Felis. Et ecce luna. Esne luna?
No.
Minime. Esne luna an boss. Est boss. Esne luna an Felis. Luna, right? Can you show me a good luna? A luna, please. Et ecce canis, et canis parva est, canicula est. Canicula, show me canicula. It's like calling a dog. Canicula. Canicula est, et ecce cochlear. Cochlear. You want to show me cochlear? Esne cochlear?
No.
Minime. Esne canis an cochlear. Canis, Okay, I would like you to, maybe I'll walk up back here so you can see better. So I would like you to try and make the gestures with me while I do our new nursery rhyme. So just try and imitate my gestures. Somnium fallit. And Felis, can I see a Felis, please? And Felis hic psallit. Praeter volat. Lunam nunc bos. Canicula ridet. Haec conspicans. Fugit. Cochlear cum lance nunc nos. Good job, thank you. Can you tell me, did anyone notice anything different from the English nursery rhyme? Anything? We're going to do it one more time, so pay attention to one thing that is different from, and you all know the English nursery rhyme, right? Good. So one more thing. And this time, if you feel like it, you can say those keywords that we practiced. You can say those with me. If you don't want to, just keep making the gestures. That's perfectly fine. So, somnium fallit, and Felis hic psallit. Praeter volat, lunam nunc bos. Canicula ridet. Haec conspicans. Fugit. Cochlear cum lance nunc nos. Anyone notice anything different from the English version?
I felt like there was something extra at the end.
Yeah, very good. So in the English, how does the English version end? The dish runs away with the spoon. Fugit cochlear cum lance nunc. I guess I should do nos, this. So who's fleeing with whom? Fugit cochlear cum lance. The spoon is running away with the dish. So that's one difference here. Yeah. So my lanke. And then it's freeing from us, away from us. Yeah. Good job. Thank you. So for the little ones, you would just basically keep doing this until they start speaking along. So really, you don't need to make little children speak. They will once they feel comfortable. So let them make the gestures along with you, and just invite them. You can speak along with me if you like. And little kids are usually eager enough to want to do it once they can. With middle and high school, that's perhaps not so much the case. You might have to get them to do this. But for the little ones, did you want to interrupt there?
Just talking about gestures, since usually your students are facing you have them, so you were using your right hand, I use my right hand.
I don't think it matters. I mean, for the most part, it doesn't matter. Unless there's a gesture where it matters, then maybe, yeah, turn around. But I think for the most part, it doesn't really matter so much. Yeah. And then, of course, in higher levels, higher levels, I'm still talking about elementary here, so 4th and 5th grade, you can draw students' attention a bit more to the language itself after they have started memorizing it for several class periods. So you can, at that point, have them maybe even read it. You could, at that point, also integrate some just very brief moments of, so let's look at the subject. What is the subject in our felicipsalit? Who is playing a stringed instrument? Who is doing this? And then just ask those questions. And the praetervola lunam nunc bos. Who is flying over the moon? That's the boss, right? So very brief moments of where you can draw students' attention explicitly to elements of the language. But really what I most want to emphasize here is those 3 elements here. Always try to have a visual and have a gesture. That's really the most powerful thing to make language meaningful and to really help students understand it in a lasting way. So having a meaningful context, having a visual, and having the gesture, that is really paramount for the little ones. And the added benefit is that if students are doing something with their hands, they're not throwing pencils, they're doing something productive, right? So that's also always an added benefit. The other element that I wanted to show you here is a Gouin series. François Gouin, maybe you guys know him, very an excellent French actually classicist who came to develop this idea of learning language through a series of logically or chronologically connected sentences. And usually those series are about between like 5 and 8 sentences that kind of tell a mini story. So we're going to do that today. And usually when I do a Gouin series, I don't do that with visuals, but through actions and even real props. But you can, of course, also use pictures with that. But we're just going to do little props here. So I would like you to watch me very closely and tell me what you think my little story is about. Mus in domo est. Feles murem videt. Feles ad murem currit. Feles murem capit. Mus mintrit. Feles murem edit. Feles saturae laeta est. So what was my little story about? Someone, come on, you eager 6-year-olds. You're dying to tell me. Right. Can anyone? Yes, chasing it. Very good. Yes, very good. Anything else? We got anything? So you can, at this point, go through it one time in English, just if you want to make sure to fully clarify. I don't typically do that because I think children, as long as it is very obvious, I think you can really figure it out very well, and students do. Maybe the only thing is, if you have something like mus in domo, is to make sure that they know that this means what? House. The mouse is in the house, right? We're starting with that. So I would like you to make the gestures with me, please. Mus in domo est. Feles murem videt. Feles ad murem currit. Feles murem capit. Mus mintrit. Good. Feles murem edit. Feles satura et laeta est. And it's also very helpful at first to just focus on the keywords, on maybe the verbs. So let's do one round of just that. So the first one, there's really in domo. We still have to do that. So show me a good in domo est. Videt, feles videt, feles currit, feles capit, feles edit. No, sorry. If you were really 6-year-old, you would have shouted out. But you forgot, you forgot. Okay, so before she eats, what does the mouse do? Mintrit. Feles edit, felesatura et laeta est. So we're going to do one round where you do the gestures without me. So mus in domo est. Feles murem videt. You can just do the verbs, the main action. Videt. Feles ad murem currit. Feles murem capit. Mus mintrit. Feles murem edit. Felesatura et laeta est. Awesome, awesome. And once again, we invite students to slowly speak along as they're comfortable, and really at first maybe just the feles or maybe just the verbs. And so in each class period, you should go through the whole series at least 4 or 5 times, ideally 6. You can at some point just pass, like if you have props, pass them on to different children so they can act it out. You can have students come to the front to act it out while everyone else is saying it and gesturing it. So that's important to still keep everyone else engaged. They shouldn't just be watching because they'll lose interest very quickly. But the idea is that they will actually memorize this entire series. And usually if you have enough repetitions in a class period, after about 6 class periods, they have pretty much fully memorized all of these sentences, as long as there is enough repetition in each class period. If you just go through it once, then of course that's not enough. And you can maybe in like the 3rd or 4th lesson, you can have students read along. I wouldn't recommend doing that earlier because usually pronunciation goes straight to hell if you do that. For some reason, if they start reading it, they pronounce it in English. So don't give it to them until they have really internalized the language pretty well. And then at that point, you can also draw their attention, again, in 4th and 5th grade, to elements of the language like, oh, so here we have mus in domo est, but then feles murem videt. What do you notice what changes, right? You can just very briefly talk about how the nouns change depending on who is doing the action. Or maybe draw their attention to verb endings. Again, really just like 5-10 minutes of explicit drawing their attention to these elements. And then also always using beautiful works of art as a way to introduce either a new grammar topic or vocabulary is always wonderful. So here we have, I think I might need to come back down here again. Okay, so est feles? Minime, non est feles, est puer, est puer. Quid est? Feles est. Quod feles in pictura sunt? Numeremos. 1, 2, 3. That third one is a little hard to see. Quod feles in pictura sunt? Show me, please. 3 feles. Quod feles? 3 feles. 3 feles in pictura sunt. Est ne feles? Minimi, non est feles. Est avis. Show me avis, please. Avis in pictura est. Una avis ante feres et puerum stat. Quod aves in pictura sunt? Aves in cavea sunt. Quod aves? Numeremos. The light here is not making this easy to see, sorry. So, 1, show me please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, et 7. 7 aves in pictura sunt. Esne haec aves in cavea? Minime, non est in cavea. Quod aves in cavea sunt? Quod? Show me. Sex aves in cavea sunt. Quod aves in pictura sunt? Quod? Septem, ita, septem aves in pictura sunt. And so on. So here, the main focus would have been on, oops, I'm falling apart, would have been on learning, I mean, you can use it for counting, you can use it for introducing new vocabulary, like maybe a new scenery, a new topic. Grammar aspect, yesterday I talked about using it for introducing particular grammar too. Here the focus might have been just on maybe counting. So it's always possible to find a picture, and it doesn't really matter if it is a picture in French or in Spanish. You can always find a beautiful work of art to help students learn something, a new aspect. We also, in the curriculum, we use what we call Little Socratic talk, or Little Socratic conversations. And we have PowerPoints for this, but I wanted to give you a demonstration of how to do it even if you don't have a PowerPoint, because that can take a long time to prepare, and you don't have that time. So you can always just bring props, use things that you have at home, use things that you can bring to class. And it's basically a guided conversation where you start out with yes-no questions, and then you proceed to either-or questions, and then you proceed to either single word answer or to complete sentence responses. But in terms of a structure, that's always going to be the same, because that way you start out by providing the input, and even asking the questions provides input, because in an either or question, you're already giving the options. The students just need to pick which one is true, right? So let's do a little example here. Canis est et canis currit. Show me currit. Canis currit. Feles non currit. Feles non currit. Currit ne canis? Ita canis currit. Currit ne feles? Minime. Feles non currit. Feles dormit. Show me dormit. Feles dormit. Dormit ne canis? Minime, canis currit. Dormit ne feles? Ita, feles dormit. Feles dormit et mus edit. Mus edit. Dormit ne mus? Minime. Currit ne mus? Minime. Edit ne mus? Ita, mus edit. Quis currit? Canis and feles. Canis currit. Quis dormit? Feles and canis. Feles dormit. Quis edit? Canis and mus. Mus, ita. Quid agit feles? Feles dormit and currit. Feles dormit. Quid agit canis? Edit and currit. Currit. Quid agit mus? Edit and currit. Edit. Quid agit canis? Currit. Quid agit feles? Dormit. Et quid agit mus? Edit. And then you could also have a complete sentence like, tell me, canis, currit, and so on. And add in more verbs, of course, more action words. But so once again, if you just follow this basic kind of structure of going from yes, no to either or to one word or complete sentences, it's very easy for students to gradually build their language skills. Okay, and let's move on to reading, which I emphasized yesterday already that it's really the single most important thing to do, because it is at the heart of a classical education in any subject and for any grade level. So reading is really the most important thing we can do. And at the earliest levels, really the idea for reading is that students get exposure to a larger range of words and larger range of grammatical structures than what you would use in these guided conversations or even in the Gouin series, which would be more limited in terms of basic structures. But in reading, you can expose them to a wider range, and it will be comprehensible if you choose good picture books, books that have pictures that students can relate to, and of course still using things like gestures as well. So I'm going to do a little demonstration of this picture book, and partly I chose this because it is available in every single language in this world, so you can read this in French, you can read this in Spanish, you can read it in Chinese or whatever. It's there in every language, so we're going to do this here. Maybe I need to stay up here. Okay, so in luce lunae, no, I need to be down here. Let me take this with me. Oops. Ovulum in folio jacebat. Ovulum in folio jacebat. Jacebat ne ovulum in luna minime. Jacebat ne ovulum in folio. Ita ovulum in folio jacebat. Jacebat ne luna in folio minime. Quid jacebat in folio? Ovulum, ita ovulum in folio jacebat. Okay, this is my clicker here. Mane die solis, sol callidus ortus est. What do I do? Here we are. Just must not touch. Okay. So sol callidus ortus est et ecce ex ovo venit eruca parvula eruca. Show me eruca. Eruca parvula et valde exuriens venit. Show me valde exuriens. Estne luna? Minime, non est luna, est sol. Est sol. So if this is sol, what day is die solis? Sunday. Die solis. Quis venit die solis? Quis venit? Quis? Eruca parvula. Eruca parvula venit die solis. Coipit petere cibum. What do you think she's starting to do? Looking for food. Coipit. Quis coipit petere cibum? Quis? Eruca ita. Die lunae per unum malum momardit. Show me momardit. Momardit. Sed ad hoc exuriebat. Show me. Exuriebat. Quis exuriebat? Eruca. Et quid? Per quid momardit? Unum malum, per unum malum. Die lunae, what do you think that day is? That's Monday, yeah, so if yesterday was Sunday. Die martis per duopira momardit, sed ad hoc exuriebat. Momordit ne per unum pirum an duopira. Duopira, unum, duopira. And die martis, what day is that? That's Tuesday. Die mercurii per tria pruna momordit, sed ad hoc exuriebat, right? Per quod pruna momordit? Per quod? Tria pruna, per tria pruna momordid. Et die iovis per quatuor fraga momordid. Show me. Sed ad hoc esuriebat. Per quod fraga momordid. Per quod? Quatuor. Per quatuor fraga. And we can go through counting them and so on. So just to give you an idea, the students are always, as much as possible, get them to start speaking along with you. I mean, of course, acting out much of what you say, but also the goal is for them to really memorize complete phrases. Like, for example, here, sed ad hoc esuriebat, after a couple of pages, they're going to just say that and keep saying that. And then by and by, they can basically memorize an entire picture book, which is what students do, or little kids do in English, when they over and over request the same picture book. They get these patterns and they memorize most of the book. So they can do the same thing in a foreign language. Now, briefly here about pre-rhetoric and writing. So one way in which we can get students to start writing sentences is by giving them the components of a sentence. They still have to then meaningfully put this together and make a sentence, but the elements are all there, so they don't have to invent a sentence. Here, for this part, they would have to find a subject, then find the right verb, and then find something that this goes with. When you first start out, you might keep it even more simple and just have maybe third person, so just third person singular, then a third person verb, and something to combine it with. And then gradually build maybe third person singular and third person plural. So this has too much to do at the first, so this is not meant to be done the first time that they're writing a sentence. One thing that students at this age find really more appealing than writing meaningful sentences is writing nonsensical sentences. So allow them to do that. They could have a sentence like, the horses are in the tree, but then they have to draw an illustration that shows that they know what they wrote. Or even better, you have them write 3 sentences, and then they change papers with their partner. The partner has to read what they wrote and then draw an illustration. So that way they have to also read what someone else said and then understand it and then make a drawing that shows that they comprehended what their partner wrote. And then if you have elements like different adjective endings, always walk around and make sure that, just help them correct it so that when their partner is reading it, that they are reading something that is correct. And then for the little ones, you can simply give them sentences to copy. Copy work is excellent for the early grades, so they can just copy some sentences, but then they have to draw the errors into the right parts of the picture, again to demonstrate that they comprehend the sentence that they copied, that they aren't just blindly copying something. So you could give them maybe 7 or 8 sentences, they pick their favorite, whatever, 3 or 4, and then they draw the errors in. And then maybe with students in 4th and 5th grade, they could write their own sentences, or at least a few, and then again draw those errors. And so I also mentioned Reader's Theater yesterday, and I wanted to emphasize that again because it's really a very, very powerful kind of budding orator's training device. It is so great for diction, for fluency, and just absorbing more of the language, because when they practice Reader's Theater in different groups, they will be reading it over and over. So they might be practicing it in one group one day, but maybe you put them in a different group the next day and they get a different role. So they are practicing something different, but they're still absorbing the language of that same book. So that's really a very, very powerful thing to do. And I think, I think that's really all I have. I would love to hear your questions. Thank you. Please.
Hi. When do you introduce poem? Would it be with a nursery rhyme or the reader theater?
Poetry, is it?
Poetry, yeah.
So yes, I think poetry would be that would be a great thing to do for the for memorization. So for the grammar phase, something that you recite as a class at the beginning of a class lesson. And yes. I mean, if it depends on the poem. If it is a dramatic poem, if it is a ballad, that can be both a piece for memorization and something that you act out and perform. So there are definitely some poems that invite a reader's theater approach, but many poems don't. So it kind of depends on the poem. But that aspect is great too. Yes.
So the reader's theater, would you use some of like the nursery rhymes, fairy tales, things that have a dialogue going on?
Yeah, I mean, so reader's theater, I'm thinking more of, more of really having a dialogue. So not so much, I mean, some poems do have that where there are roles where people speak, but I'm really thinking more of transforming, for example, maybe a fairy tale, but instead of narrating, instead of having narrator, you write the lines of, so basically you transform the whole thing into dramatic dialogue. So instead of the narrator saying, the 3 little pigs lived with their mother, one of them maybe just says, we're the 3 little pigs and we're living like with our mom, and then something along those lines. So it would involve, I think for Spanish and French, I know there are a lot of reader's theater versions already that you can either buy on Amazon or like Teachers Pay Teachers. I mean, just finding some, or I mean, creating your own is also really not that difficult because, I mean, we're dealing with pretty basic language here, and if you have the language skills, that is something fairly easy to do, to just, write those little lines.
I saw that you took us in without a prelude, which I call, like for example, if I am to introduce something new to my students, usually I grab most of the vocabulary words for us to interact with it before I give them the story. Why? Because I learned over time to, I realized over time that we come at a point we don't have the same understanding and become really short. They are defeated and I am too. So I decided to start with the vocabulary first. And then what I learned also, just to make sure that we see the same thing on the picture. Is we're reading the same thing, yes or no? And then if not, I need to go back and change to make an agreement on the vocabulary and then start the poem or the lesson or the story. But I saw you doing, just taking us in like candidly. That was sweet. So, but I'm scared to do
I love that you say that, and I think a lot of teachers are. So my message is please don't be scared, and please don't underestimate your students, especially the little ones. They will catch on much faster than some of our older selves, and they are kind of more used to not understanding every single word, and they're okay with that. When you read Where the Wild Things Are to your 2-year-old, they didn't understand every single word, and they still loved the story. And after you read it to them 45 times, they understood pretty much everything and probably recited the whole thing back to you. So understanding is a gradual process. It's not something that needs to happen right away. And so when I did the nursery rhyme, I'm sure there were some words that you didn't understand, and doing it for the first time, that's okay. But the goal is by and by to understand more, and I think it's also fine to clarify. For example, the beginning says, somnium fallit, a dream deceives. This gesture doesn't really fully help you understand that. So at some point, maybe in the second lesson, I would explicitly tell them what it means. But I would encourage you to just be okay with not always having 100% comprehension. I think that is a good goal, or that can be a goal, but it doesn't need to happen right away. So give students time. And I mean, the little ones tend to be more tolerant of that than maybe older students. So if students ask, sure, by all means tell them, or just after going through a poem or a new grand series or story, if you don't understand a word, just raise your hand and ask. That's totally fine. But I would encourage you to just try and trust the process and trust your students.
I noticed that you were using a lot of American Sign Language gestures. Do you find that that's more helpful, or is it just the gesture that works? Like, how did you come upon those gestures?
It's a mixture, yeah. So sometimes I think some American Sign Language gestures are more complicated or less intuitive. So just, I mean, for dog, I couldn't really, this is perhaps not the best, but I can't think of a better one. So if it works, and I think really just whatever gesture works for you. Sometimes it can also be really helpful to ask you as well, what gesture would you make for this word? Can we come up like, I don't know, if you have something like friendship. Students sometimes do this, they've come up with like this hugging, or this. They come up with all sorts of ideas, so you can just let them pick something, sometimes giving them, it can be really helpful to involve them in the process of finding a good gesture. What's there?
Okay, I have two questions. I'll just ask one, and then we'll give other people a turn. And this is kind of pedagogical, so if you don't want to address it. But I was asking you yesterday about total physical response, and you were like, well, I don't, but then you were very physical, and there was all the gesturing. So I'm just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit more for me.
Connecting the gestures physical to what?
Well, when I was asking you yesterday about total physical response, you were like, I don't think that that's as important, if I'm understanding you correctly, but there was so much gesturing with this.
Right. Yeah, yes, I mean, so yes, I mean, the students really, at least in the early stages, it is perfectly sufficient for them to just respond with a gesture, and then by and by add the word to the gesture. I'm not sure if that sufficiently answers your question, but having them respond with a gesture is a valid form of response, especially for the really little ones. So we don't need to make them speak right away, and I think especially young children, just let their language emerge gradually. They are usually very eager to speak once they feel comfortable. So if you just let them make gestures for a while, at some point they will join in and speak along. But yeah, I think giving them the option of responding just with a gesture is really perfectly sufficient. So if you need to give a grade for like participation, that counts. I'm not sure if that sufficiently answered your question.
Yes, okay, I have my second question. Unless someone else has one, I'll wait.
I got a quick one. So I noticed that you limited English within that participation. So with our kinder and our first, would you also try to do that, is try to limit, like, oh, is that a cat? And then you would actually say it in the correct manner in Latin and just try to have that interaction that way? Is that the goal?
I wouldn't do that with things that are as obvious as like a cat. If you can point to an image of a cat, in whatever language you say that word, students will know that this means cat. So if it is something really obvious, I wouldn't use English. Like for the grand series, where you have several sentences and you're telling a little story, I think going through it once completely in English to fully clarify, I think that can be very helpful and reassuring. And once again, for things like poetry, where maybe there are, I mean, not every single word can be acted out or shown. So it can be very helpful to then have a full translation or to clarify in English. But I would really just do that once, very briefly, and then move back into full, And really only with words that can't be acted out or shown. What were some other questions? You had another one? Please go ahead.
Okay, well, and again, I don't know if you want to go into this because I guess it was more yesterday, but the overlay of the Trivium to that, I mean, you sort of touched on that. I mean, it's really the main thing you want to take us to take away from that, kind of not to misunderstand these as sort of separate stages, but really to incorporate these as different aspects within lessons as the curriculum develops.
Right, and I mean, I think maybe one of my other main points was also that the art of grammar doesn't mean that we're diagramming, doesn't mean that we're just looking at verb tenses and noun endings. The art of grammar is really a lot broader than our typical understanding of grammar as a subject. And I think that's really important to understand for especially the early ages, that the art of grammar is about really building up that system, is about, I mean, really the more literal translation is literary study, so immersing them in a world of stories, in a world of language, and helping them to absorb the language, the structures of the language, not just some isolated snippets.
Do we get access to the PowerPoint?
I think so. I mean, I think when they asked us to upload these to the drive, I was assuming that this would be so that they can be shared. If not, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to share. Yes. Do we have any other questions?
That was fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you.